critical to ending the sense in which the presidency was so powerful. That was a Kenya solution. The United States never prescribed that solution, but what we did was to try to assist them to make, given the crisis, to make the institutional adjustments that were so necessary.
Tendai Biti again, when it comes to Zimbabwe, and much is still in the air as we record this debate, when you look at the potential in months or years, depending on what happens, how can you see a greater level of high governance emerging within your country? How quickly can that be achieved when you look at the experience of Kenya and Ghana, which are really two ends of the spectrum?
I think the potential is inelastic. We've got an amazing population of highly educated, highly skilled Zimbabweans that are scattered all over the world.
Partly as a product of independence.
Yeah, absolutely. That is not in contestation. But we also have some functional basic infrastructure that we can build upon. But as I said before, the precondition is the issues of governance, issues of constitutionalism, issues of democratization, and issues of building institutions that protect and guarantee the permanency of this new transition, of this new revolution, and that is critical. But the potential is amazing. I suspect that within the first 5 years, we can actually achieve growth rates of around 3%, 4%. I actually believe that you can actually bring the hyperinflation down to double digits in a very short period of time. There's talent, there's political will, and there's a vision.
Ezekwesili, from the World Bank perspective, when you look at the indicators, the voice and democratic accountability, political stability, the effectiveness of government bureaucracies, the regulatory framework, the rule of law, the control of corruption, how quickly do you see a nation like Zimbabwe turning around, given the awfulness of what it's going through at the moment and the, frankly, indescribable figures of inflation, of unemployment, and everything going on there?
I guess it would be to look at similar situations that happened previously.
And what do they tell us?
What they tell us is that there's usually tremendous opportunity in the early stages. But the most important thing usually is that there is a concerted effort at defining the new path. And so the concept that he built upon, which is that, a country that's got a mass of people who ultimately get bound toward a particular direction and vision of where their country should be going, learning from the mistakes of the past, would have a greater propensity for improving on all those scores.
Because one of the things you identify, or your institute identifies, is the fact that there are some countries that deceive themselves that they're doing good governance because their growth rates are pretty good, particularly the resource-rich nations, those that have got oil and minerals.
Well, clearly that deception doesn't last for long. Because
you mean they get found out?
Yes, because you see, ultimately, if there is no broad-based growth and there is no shared growth, the growth that comes from mineral commodities is not the kind of growth that enables the diffusion that must happen, the spread out of the opportunities for the community to grow. And so the whole diversification away from a monolithic source of income would depend a lot on the quality of credible, competent, and capable states. And that's possible through the issues of institutions building that Tendai was previously talking about.
One of the critical issues raised by Zimbabwe, of course, is skills in this process of transition, having the people who can run institutions and so on. Let's move on to that. Tendai Biti, when you look at an audit, if you like, of what you've got in your country, always highly praised for skills. And those kind of skills don't exist in many other African nations when they're trying to make this transition. Is that one of the reasons why you feel relatively optimistic about Zimbabwe and the speed at which you could pick up if there's political change?
Without a doubt. But we have to create the enabling environment to facilitate the return of that skill. And part of the incentives for this group of people to come actually includes a change of the legal regime. You have to look at your constitution. You have to look at things like allowing dual citizenship. Many of these people have settled in places like London, New York, South Africa. And they've settled, they've got families. So you need to allow them to be citizens of Zimbabwe, in addition to letting their children that are being born in there to also become Zimbabweans. The second thing is that you have to create the economic framework where their minds and their capacities are employed. I have friends who are working at the UN, lawyers. You can't expect those people to come back and teach family law at the University of Zimbabwe. You have to create that environment, a social, stable environment, that their economic skills, their worldly experience are properly employed and not underutilized. But it is a resource that is critical, and I believe that it is our most important resource.
I will also remark that so far I've conducted this discussion on basis of laboratory situation. The world is opening up. Throughout, everybody is accessing what's happening elsewhere. And so the knock-on effect from all of us becoming aware of what's happening elsewhere in Africa is also moving moving systems very fast. People are learning so fast, and the individual is fast becoming aware of his or her rights and demanding accountability of leadership. All these things would help transform situations like in Zimbabwe faster than we are discussing here.
That is an important issue which I plan to come on to. Let's raise it now. Empowerment. When you see what's happening around Africa with the connectivity, level of connectivity, it's still quite limited in many ways. How much, Tendai Fraser, do you see that as an important change in the dynamics where leaderships are now accountable? The mobile phone is making them accountable if the people at community level simply don't like what they see.
I think it's critically important, and I think that any technology that leads to greater transparency, leads to greater information sharing is an important part of democracy. It doesn't necessarily lead to it. I mean, in the case of Kenya, for example, there was a movement to free press, a significant opening of the press on the eve of the violence that took place in the December election. So you can't say that it necessarily will lead to democracy, but what it does do is give empowerment to citizens. It also helps governments to better govern, because they do need to be able to get information, aggregate that information, and transfer that information into the process of decision making so that their leaders can make better judgments about how to govern and, the various policy choices that they have. So I think that is critically important.
We are in South Africa, and here, I have to say, one senses a degree of anxiety with the imminent transfer of power to a new president within the next year. Wendy Luhabe, chair of South Africa's Industrial Development Corporation, can you pick up on some of these points? Particularly the one thing which I mentioned right at the beginning of the program, that South Africa on political stability is seen as more vulnerable at the moment. You're involved in trying to generate new economic development, generate new empowerment. There is a feeling that the politics and the politicians in this country are now more vulnerable, particularly over the business of food prices, of energy prices. The president of the ANC, Jacob Zuma, said here that he predicts a time bomb on this issue, which then rebounds on the politicians.
Well, I think that part of effective management is about managing expectations. That's quite obvious. I have to remind the world that South Africa inherited a country that was almost bankrupt, with an infrastructure that was designed for 20% of the population, and that the process of reversing that legacy cannot be accomplished in 14 years. That's just simply not enough time to accomplish that.
What impact does that, though, have on the issue of governance in an enormous country like South Africa, when you look at this one critical indicator, where things are moving very well in many indicators, but not on this front?
South Africa has been exemplary in implementing and practicing good governance.
But what has to be done, from your perspective, to improve the conditions for industrial empowerment, community empowerment, which will produce a higher level of governance, because by this analysis, things are going downwards at the moment in this country?
Well, I think that the indication that things are going downwards is actually unfounded.
So you challenge the OECD when it says that, quote, widespread perception that post-apartheid government is not doing enough for poverty reduction, wealth redistribution, and service delivery improvement, which is creating...
Yes, I do. Yes, I absolutely do. I dispute that and I challenge it. And that's why I started by reminding the world of what we inherited and the legacy that we are on an ongoing basis working to overcome.
We don't want to get stuck on figures here, which are being produced by the OECD and the World Bank Institute, but do you want to come back there, Madam Ezekwesili, the fact that here we have someone from South Africa disputing the impression given by all these indicators? Are we basing our discussion here on wrong factors?
You know, I think that the basic issue is that even in the most advanced of economies, what we begin to see more and more, wider inequities. And so internally, the social cohesion on the basis of which people feel a sense of the benefit of growth, of prosperity, is something that even the most developed of economies have to be conscious about. And so you can never say that there's El Dorado in any economy. I think that clearly the more that we can spread the economic opportunities so that more and more people have the sense that they are part of the development process, the better for any society.
But again, your indicators, which are now being challenged by Wendy Lohabe, but the indicators...
I thought you said they were OECD indicators.
Well, those... They're across the board, OECD and also the World Bank Institute as well. There's a commonality across them, so let's be fair. But I'm trying to get to the vulnerabilities now, the fragilities, which are identified by your own institute as well. How do those get reversed? How do you create that move towards good governance? We've seen it in Ghana in the last 8 years. We're seeing it, hopefully, dramatically in Kenya. Things may change dramatically soon in Zimbabwe. We can't predict. But how do you create that or reduce the possibility or inevitability of fragility when it comes to creating better governance?
I think that empirically, one of the things that's been seen to help is massive investment in education. The development of a very robust human capital, a citizenry that's well aware and demanding of levels of accountability higher than the ones that they currently are used to, enable countries to progressively deepen and accentuate the basis for the transformation that you seek to see. I know that in Africa, we often forget a country like Botswana, simply because Botswana is not a country that, makes a lot of noise. But it is a country that sort of used political stability as a basis for sound economic policy choices and used that as a basis to transform itself from a purely aid-dependent country after its independence to a country that, even though rich in minerals, diamonds, has been able to build a capable state, credible institutions, still having lots of problems though, but basically on the right trajectory, has seen sustained growth over the decades of its independence. There must be something about that for other countries to learn. And so the political economy dimensions, very important, but a greater sense that the elite interest must not crowd out the interest of the citizens. So that sense of a broad-based and shared growth enables the democratic underpinnings of the kind of mobilization that was talked about.
In Zimbabwe, do you think that's what you're seeing at the moment, Tendai Biti?
Yes, but the point I made earlier that the potential for growth, the potential for sustained rehabilitation of our country and of our economy is there. The basic ingredients are there. The missing link is the political factor, the constitutional factor, the democracy deficit, and those are the things that we need to address. I think that without a doubt, there are new wins on the African continent. The example of Botswana is a good one. Ghana, Senegal, Kenya, particularly after the election on the 28th of December 2002. Things may have happened leading to the crisis in January. But yes, there were growth levels. So I think there is a revolution taking place on the African continent, a generational revolution, and I think that the history of failed states, the history of a continent with wars, with collapsed states, that history is a history that is slowly being decimated. And I think that the future for Africa 10 years, 15 years from now will have less the sad stories of Darfur, less the sad stories of Somalia, of Sierra Leone, Liberia, than now. So to me, it's a positive future.
Let me move on to an emblematic problem, which again I raised at the start, about food and fuel prices. The president of the ANC, Jacob Zuma, said very clearly here, this is a time bomb for all politicians on the continent. Is that the way you see it?
Exactly. And as you know that there have been crises and demonstrations in Egypt, in Senegal, in Cameroon, so it is continental-wide.
Could this set back the issue of governance in a country like Kenya when you're trying so hard to achieve a new balance after what you went through in December, January and February?
Certainly, you know, it is a time bomb because hungry people are an angry people. And you cannot have a political stability when people are hungry. So we must therefore come up with solutions that will ensure that there is bread at the table at an affordable price for the people of our country.
Because, President Kufuor, you haven't had to face this. We've paid tribute to what you've achieved in Ghana. Could what you've achieved in Ghana in the last 7 or 8 years, okay, there have been bumps and scrapes on the way, could all that be set back by the problems of fuel and food prices?
Naturally, but I would say it wouldn't be a setback. That would be a relapse from the current situation to former times, where, say, the nation suffered dictatorships. What's happening is that society is maturing in awareness. Unfortunately, the awareness is not locked within the nation. We see what's happening around us in the world. And I believe, even as expectations are higher, the people tend to compare situations in Ghana with, say, what's happening in the neighboring countries. So they do not, in spite of the protestations, they don't tend to expect magical solutions. They are not taken in by political haranguing or quick solutions. And even if there should be a slip, it will be very, very temporary because there's no shortcut solution, and they will come back in search more of alternating democratic leadership. If my party is found not equal to fixing the solution for them with regards to food or fuel prices, they will look to the next party democratically to come on board to try it. So, and this is democracy at work. It's more or less trial and error, moving forward, not relapse into ways where one man would sit on top.
Jendai Fraser and Obi Ezekwesili, do you agree with the President about a degree of pragmatic tolerance by large numbers of people, particularly in the lower middle class and those who are really poor, the millions across this continent? I
think it depends on the country, and I think that that's true in Ghana because you have a leadership that communicates with the people and that has been serving them and is accountable. But I think that in other countries, I have actually seen these riots exacerbate the tension in society in which a leader is refusing to open up, where they use it as an excuse. They say that, well, the opposition is exploiting the problems of food crises, and so they crack down on the public in terms of their military forces and their police forces, and they use it as an excuse for ending term limits and other reasons. So I think the way in which a leadership responds to these crises, I do think that across Africa, many of the democracies, although the trend lines are very positive, are fragile. And so that these food crises can, in fact, put people in the street, police and others who are not well trained overreact, and you can have an explosion. So yes,
it could set back the improvements on governance?
Yeah, country
Quite
by country,
significantly.
it depends. But yes, especially in countries where you have these leaders for life, where you have very weak and irresponsible oppositions, yes, it can.
Obi Ezekwesili, do you accept that as well? You have to make very clear judgments about the success economically or lack of success of countries across Africa. Do you fear that you'll be going to be producing reports in the coming months which suggest things are going to start going backwards because of these new pressures?
Depending on the set of policies that countries take. And that takes us again back to the issue of the capable state. The choice of policy, the choice of fiscal or trade policy, take a typical example of Ghana. Ghana is going to suffer the problems of the rising energy costs and the rising food costs. Northern part of Ghana is a place where there's a wider disparity in terms of the economic opportunities. And so poverty is wider and deeper there. Now, if you followed policy from that perspective and targeted solving the kinds of needs that are manifested during these kinds of seasons, and you transparently communicate the set of policies that you're choosing, then people understand and they follow it. But this is not the time for knee-jerk populist reaction, because that's going to undo the very relatively fragile macroeconomic stability that is necessary for there to be the domestic investment as well as foreign direct investment that enables growth and ultimately reduction in poverty.
Let me just finally get some voices from the other delegates here at the World Economic Forum. Could you introduce yourself? Can I have no speeches, just short points based on our discussion, please?
My name is Admasu Tadessa. I'm from the Development Bank of Southern Africa. I have a very brief question. A lot has been said about transparency and independence of electoral commissions in Africa. What are the prospects for elevating the electoral adjudication process out of the domestic sphere through the African Union or the APRM mechanism or something like that? Because I think it's become very clear that there's so many problems that are locked up in that kind of box.
Prime Minister Odinga, do you even accept the principle, not enough transparency, much better monitoring is needed after what you went through in Kenya at the end of December?
Certainly, yes. I think that if we had had a truly independent electoral commission, as we were demanding 2 years ago, we would not have had the crisis that we had.
Tendai Biti, at the time of recording this debate, of course, one of the things you and the Movement for Democratic Change are saying in advance of the planned presidential election, we want monitors. We want 9,000 of them. When you hear that question, what's your response?
Well, I think it is fair to say that in the majority of African situations, electoral bodies have been a personal choice of what the Prime Minister calls the imperial president. And that is unfortunate. But they've also been precedent of actually regionalizing these electoral bodies. For instance, the case of the DRC Congo, where the body was actually assisted by other players.
So you're agreeing significant reform
yes,
must be undertaken?
I think the key issue is not that these bodies can't run elections. In Kenya, the board actually ran the election well. And I would dare say in Zimbabwe, the board actually ran the election well. But these bodies are not strong enough to stand executive pressure when it comes to manipulation of the outcome.
My name is Afif Ben Yada. I'm the publisher of New African and African Business. I think really we are sick and tired to have lessons about democracy and about good governance, because the future of Africa, we are 1 billion people. We can't be 1 billion stupid people. We are people who have the best engineers in Africa, the best doctors, the best financial people and whatever. So we are doing very well. Why always look at what is bad? Why don't we look at what is good? Like that we emulate the successful makers, the successful businessmen which are here.
All right.
Like that yes, that's very important.
I hear your point, but remember at the beginning of the program, I did report the figures from the OECD and the World Bank Institute saying there have been significant improvements.
My name is Matthews Chikaunda, former Minister of Finance and Governor of the Reserve Bank in Malawi. I would like to say that good governance, especially on the political and economic fronts, is very key for any meaningful development to take place. And I used to say to the presidents I've worked with that there's no way we mortals can talk economic variables into silence, because they have a very resilient way of coming up and propping up their heads at the wrong times. My question is, or comment, is to say that if in South Africa there's a feeling, as Wendy had portrayed before, that there's been a lot of progress, which we don't deny, how well distributed has that progress been, and why is it that now we're seeing the sort of ugliness that we have seen in terms of the xenophobic violence that we have seen?
Because of the legacy that I referred to, that progress has obviously not been adequately and sufficiently distributed. The function of the attacks, which are very unfortunate, that we regret as a country, that we've witnessed, are an expression of the most vulnerable in our society fighting for limited resources. I think that the term that's been attributed to it is an unfortunate term that doesn't describe the sentiment on the ground. We have no fear of foreigners who live in this country. In fact, we are one of the most welcoming nations in the world, and we know that we owe our democracy to many African countries and different parts of the world that provided sanctuary for more than 5 decades during our liberation struggle. So we would be the last people to throw people away for those reasons.
Can I thank you all for joining in this debate on a pretty technical issue, but a fundamental issue for Africa, with the reports which are concluding that really the long-term trend is still encouraging, even if there are weaknesses and fragility. And I think what we've done in this BBC World debate is highlighted just how fast things are changing, by and large, in a positive direction, but with vulnerabilities ahead. Can I thank you all for joining us on this debate at the World Economic Forum here in Cape Town. From me, Nick Gowing, thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
This edition of the World Debate was recorded just before one of the panel, Tendai Biti, was arrested and charged with treason in Zimbabwe. He's currently being held in prison in Harare.
He is always determined.
We see somebody who's just a blank canvas, and he knows he's got more than that, and I think he's quite proud of being able to fool everybody.
Guys who are really successful are true to themselves.
Oh, you win 2 U.S. Opens. To me, you're a great player.
This week on Click, we've got our head in the clouds, looking at how the latest online applications can lighten the load for your desktop PC or mobile devices. Plus, we speak to 2 authors who deliver strong warnings about the future of the internet itself. That's all on Click, only on BBC World News.
Namibia may be one of Africa's newest countries, but its tourist industry is fast becoming one of the continent's big success stories. It's attracting more than 1 million visitors a year and is close to becoming the country's biggest income earner. Join us on Fast Track on BBC World News this week to find out why.